So, how do you know if something is a monster? Well, it looks like a monster, right? But what does that mean? Monsters, well, first of all, they don't look like us, and they typically don't look like anything we've seen before, although consider Tim the Enchanter in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, who tries to warn the knights about a monster with big, nasty, pointy teeth. And it, of course, turns out to be a rabbit. And then they relax. And then it turns out to be a rabbit that can kind of fly around and kill them all. What I'm saying is monstrosity is sometimes in the eye of the beholder, and sometimes it's in how sharp the thing's teeth is. We're going to explore the idea of monsters today from a number of different angles. Yes, Mr. Zevon, there are monsters among us. We're going to talk about that today. Like, who gets to call who a monster, among other things. What function do monsters play in the way that we think about our reality, even the formation of the universe? There's a lot to cover, is what I'm saying. So I'm going to get going right now. Our first guest on the show today is Natalie Lawrence, historian of science and the author of Enchanted Creatures, Our Monsters and Their Meanings. First of all, hello, Natalie Lawrence.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So we could just do a little etymology here. Somewhere in that word monster is probably the word about warning, the same root that gives us something like admonish. There's something about monsters. They're trying to show us something or warn us about something, or maybe they exist to do that. Can you say a little bit more?
Yeah, so the word monster comes from, two Latin words. There's manere, which is to warn, and monstrare, which is to demonstrate. So in that, it holds both of the kind of aspects of monsters, in that they warn us about things that are hidden, and they also demonstrate or they reveal hidden things. And in some ways, they're coded messages that you can dissect and work out what's hidden underneath.
So let's just pick a monster and see and kind of pull it apart a little bit and see what we find it showing us and warning us about. Let's pick Grendel. I'm very fond of Grendel. You have a great section about Grendel. I'll let you set this up, but this is just for people to orient. We're talking about something that's probably based on maybe a Danish folktale or something pre-10th century, but probably written by, I don't know, maybe a Christian monk or part of an oral tradition that winds up in the hands of a Christian monk. But tell us a little bit more.
So Grendel is one of the monsters in the text Beowulf, which is one of the canonical texts of Old English history, and it was written just before the Norman invasion. So just before this pivotal point where the world changed for everybody. And it was written by a Christian author about this old bad past and this old world where the Christian worldview wasn't really dominant. And that kind of gives you, it's a friction point. These monsters emerge from these clashes between these worldviews, but also between the human worlds and the wilderness as well. So Grendel and his mother, they were meant to be descendants of Cain. So Cain was the first murderer of his brother in the Bible.
And then we get Gog and Magog, who are the offspring of Cain, who are living in some other place too. Yeah.
kind of black sheep lineage,
Yeah.
the black sheep human lineage.
And can I just pause you there for a second? Because I think one of the things that kind of emerges for me, reading your book and then Sareka Davies' book, is there's something kind of liminal about monsters. And we're talking right now about some liminal stuff. There's a threshold moment, maybe a couple of threshold moments that are going here. As you say, it's right before 1066. Things are about to change kind of radically. The world is going to get more complicated and kind of sort of multinational in one place. I think it's also liminal in the sense of the growing dominance of Christianity. Christianity, and it's a syncretistic religion. It tends to absorb pre-existing myths and legends and stuff like that. So you've got Christians looking at a pagan myth. Anyway, continue.
Yeah, exactly. So I would say in general, one of the best ways of thinking about monsters isn't really what they look like because they're so incredibly varied, but is wherever you have boundaries of any kind, whether those be social, geographic, any way in which we structure the world, you'll get monsters emerging in the cracks between the cracks of those boundaries. So monsters are emergent beasts or creatures or whatever they are of the boundaries that we structure the world with. So Grendel and his mother, they're called border steppers, for example. They're these creatures that live between. It's never quite clear whether they're humans or monsters or quite what they are. You never get a really direct description of them. So you can actually read quite a lot into the worldview of the person translating the text, as well as the original writer, in the way that they choose to translate the descriptions of Grendel and his mother. They live in the wilderness outside of Heorot, the Danish stronghold, and every night Grendel crosses that border. He makes a violent incursion into the Danish stronghold and kills a lot of people.
And there seems to be a little bit of what we now call FOMO going on with Grendel too. There's a party happening. He's not invited to the party. I mean, this is what happens every night. The Danes start kicking up their heels and drinking and having a lot of fun, and that's what draws Grendel moth to flame. But he wasn't invited to this party.
Oh, 100%. Yes. They actually depicted that quite well in the film. The idea where you see Grendel, I think that was in 2004 or something. You see Grendel, his eardrums are in pain from the sound of the Danes having fun. And you see a similar exclusion with monsters like Frankenstein, for example. He's the Frankenstein's monster. He's listening to this French family speaking and having a lovely time together and talking about poetry, and he knows he's excluded from it, so he kills them. Or Caliban.
Caliban's a great example. Caliban, in a whole bunch of ways, is excluded, including the fact that Prospero is worried that maybe Miranda and Caliban are going to get married or something. I mean, he is a rejected potential groom, and he's monstrous compared to everyone else.
Although at the same time, we never quite know how monstrous Caliban really is.
Yeah.
So that's also open to interpretation. And very much the exclusion from the realm of beauty, the realm of love, and the realm of acceptance, it creates this envious viciousness in these monsters. And in some ways, it is the unpleasant feelings that are projected out to the monsters from the people who are excluding them. They are in some ways creating the monsters that they then have to fear and that they then have to exclude.
Yeah, that's really, really beautifully put. I just, as long as we're on that particular point, I think increasingly some of us anyway, get interested in the idea that everybody has a viewpoint, everybody has a story. So, centuries and centuries later, the novelist John Gardner writes this terrific book, Grendel, which is entirely the way things look from Grendel's point of view. And unsurprisingly, he's not the monster anymore. They're the monsters, which is kind of what you're saying a little bit about Caliban, too. Caliban has a story to tell about the way he's being treated.
And actually, one of the influences for John Gardner's Grendel was Caliban on Setebos, which was a retelling from Caliban's perspective. And Gardner's work was a wonderful inversion of the perspective. It basically becomes almost like an eco-criticism. It becomes Grendel as protector of the wilderness against the ravages of the humans. So the humans become the monsters destroying the world. And Grendel is watching this happen, and he goes into this nihilistic nosedive and then thinks that the only value he can make for himself in life is just to be this destructive force.
Yeah, and I think Gardner also paves the way for things like Wicked and Gregory Maguire's other books, which are often from the point of view of a historic fairy tale villain / witch / monster. That idea that maybe they have a story to tell. So we see also a little bit about Grendel's mother, I believe incarnated by Angelina Jolie in the movie that you were just talking about. But there's like a whole other thing with Grendel's mother, who in the legend, I believe, has no name. She's just Grendel's mother. And, she's got a function more than she has a name. But say a bit about her.
So she's this sort of shadowy, mysterious creature that lives in this lair beyond a mere, and she has a whole hoard of treasure that she seems to have acquired somehow, and she's sort of protected by sea monsters or watery monsters. And in the original poem, you could actually interpret her as being quite a morally okay figure, in that all that she does is revenge the death of her son. She doesn't actually attack anyone. She doesn't do anything bad. She just revenges the death of her son, which is actually quite a brave thing to do, especially in the moral framework of the original kind of heroic Germanic age from which it's meant to be set.
But there's a kind of "don't make mama mad" meme that's kind of starting there. You link it to Shelob in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. I would link it to another thing too, almost kind of a clash of different versions of Mother, and it all boils down to one line in one movie. So we're going to play A2 first here. We're going to play a little clip from actually the second Alien movie, Aliens, A2.
Get away from her, you bitch!
So I don't think we had to bleep bitch in that situation. But anyway, so what you see is Sigourney Weaver, who's put on this exoskeleton to fight another nameless mother. The alien is a xenomorph, I think they say, but there's this little girl who's being menaced. And it's kind of interesting because what you see there is probably from the xenomorph's point of view, it just wants to eat people and lay lots of eggs and create lots more xenomorphs, and just life will be pretty good. And then
as any good mother animal would want to do, I think.
And then you see
it's being a good mother.
Yeah, and then you see Sigourney Weaver's character Ripley kind of artificially monsterizing herself so she can go fight this thing. But I don't know, unpack it a little bit more if you want to.
There is something I think. I'm not a mother myself, but from what I've seen, I think mothers can feel like they can inhabit this monstrous, violent persona if they need to. There's this sense of if they have to protect their offspring, they will do, and they will do anything to achieve that. And so Grendel's mother is very much in this vein. And the fact that she's never given a name makes her more universal in a way. She's sort of something that that more people can connect to, and is a broader figure.
And, I think there is a lot to be said about the way how can I put this? The way that men are often scared by women, or they decide to be scared by women. And by the time we get to Alien, that creature is pretty clearly a vagina dentata, and it's just sort of like a lot of scary teeth, and it's apparently a mother and all this kind of stuff. And it made me think, we had a guest on who pointed out that Jaws is also kind of a vagina dentata. This thing comes up out of the water, and you just see teeth basically and a couple of eyes. Let's play the clip that you quote in your book. This is Robert Shaw as Quint in the 1975 celebrating a big anniversary movie, Jaws.
You know the thing about a shark, he's got lifeless eyes, black eyes, like a doll's eyes. When he comes at you, he doesn't seem to be living until he bites you, and those black eyes roll over white, and then you hear that terrible high-pitched screaming. The ocean turns red, and despite all the pounding and the hollering, they all come in, they rip you to pieces.
So there's sort of a clash in the movie between ichthyology, embodied by Richard Dreyfuss, and mythology and legend. He's telling the story of a legend here, and it's very much like a lot of the other legends you chronicle. But say more.
It just struck me how actually you can read that scene in quite a few different ways. And if you think about it as a vagina dentata, it has these sort of dark erotic overtones in a funny kind of way. One of the other monsters that I talk about is obviously Medusa, who is another kind of vagina dentata. She's got these tusked teeth, this grinning predator, a bit like a shark. And I think this is these kinds of monsters are really good examples of primal psychological fears and the way that monsters can embody deep psychological and developmental processes that we go through that sometimes stick with us and never leave, and we never work them through. And they're actually, this is why they're so culturally important, is because we need things to represent these visceral these visceral instincts and these visceral fears that we have.
Yeah, I mean, so much of the psychological journey is not just hinted at, but made clear in a lot of myths. One of the things you write about is the idea of a labyrinth. You don't just have a minotaur. You have a labyrinth, and you can take that all the way to The Shining. But say a little bit, what is the labyrinth in that situation?
I mean, one of my favorite quotes that's relevant here is by the Roman historian Sallust, who said that myths are things that never happened but always are. So they are things that they didn't actually occur. None of the myths. He was referring to stories of the gods, but equally applies to monsters. These things never actually happened. They never actually existed, but they are still realities of our subjective worlds. And I think the labyrinth. Freud talked extensively about the labyrinth, and he likened the labyrinth to the corridors of the subconscious, the winding twists and turns of the subconscious mind. You can interpret it in all sorts of different ways, more or less literally, as you like, but I think there is something about the labyrinth with the monster in the center, which we can all kind of resonate with, this idea that we have these things inside us that are difficult for us to face, and we create mental defenses against them, and do almost anything to avoid actually encountering them. But if you do, through therapy or any other process, manage to go down into the labyrinth and face the monsters, you generally find that they are not nearly as bad as you thought they were, and that you especially are not nearly as monstrous as you suspected you might be or feared you might be, which can be a very hard process to go through, but is also is an important one in the process of developing, maturing, but also can be very reassuring as well.
Yeah, I mean, to a certain degree, reading your book and also the book we'll be talking about in the next segment, there's so much self-examination or implied self-examination in thinking about monsters, right? We're really thinking in some ways almost the definition of a monster is someone who's not like us, doesn't look like us, has sharper teeth than we do, has more fur, whatever. But there's something beyond that too, right? Which is that we are invited in some cases to contemplate the way that it is maybe similar to us or some part of ourselves.
Well, I think often the things that revolt us the most are the things that sometimes are closest to us, but we wish weren't. And I think, so we often see monsters as things that are very different from us, partly because we want to reinforce those boundaries. We want to create greater definition between what we see as us and them. So it's like making caricatures, for example, like racial caricatures that have always been used to try and heighten differences and make it seem like other people were more alien from us than they actually were. And that's a way of being able to get rid of things in ourselves that we don't want to own up to, and also have more control of our images of the things that we want to differentiate from ourselves.
You know, we may have time for maybe one more topic here. And one thing that you're interested in this book is the way in which things that are actual, real creatures in nature are often perceived as monsters. I mean, snakes in particular. It starts very early with Genesis, if not sooner. But say a little bit more about that, the way we decide that certain things are monsters and certain things just aren't.
So I think the things that are real that are monsters highlights just how when you put boundaries on the world, you're going to get monsters emerging from those boundaries. So I talk a lot about funny creatures like pangolins and dodos and other things that were seen as monsters because they didn't fit into the Aristotelian categories that we structured the world with traditionally. Something like a snake, I think anything that can kill you is probably more likely to be seen as monstrous, something like a shark or an alligator. Monsters have often been, we tend to imagine monsters from the pieces of nature that we see around us, monstrous creatures. And the predators are of the obvious candidates for this, right? It's like dragons are all of the different predators put together.
Right. Although we're the ultimate predator, and we're always more dangerous to that animal than the animal is to us. You make that point about sharks and the way in which Jaws kind of touched off the mass murder of sharks. But, you know, snakes lose more often than they win in their encounters with us.
Yes, they do. But I think if you were a little primate, that wouldn't be the case. So there's a lot of ways in which our visual systems have been shaped by our long relationship with snakes at a time when they certainly were winning more often than they are now.
Yeah, when you say little primate, you're talking about the fact that scientists we'll use snakes to scare monkeys.
Well, we are little primates, really, still.
Yeah, we still are. But
Just
it is
a lot of kit.
yeah, it is odd that we sort of make those kinds of decisions, and then that idea that animals, actual real animals, are sort of xenomorphs, to use the Jaws term. And I think it's sort of implied there in our reactions to the possible sources of COVID, right? There's this wet market that has raccoon dogs and pangolins, and there's all these weird animals there that we're not familiar with. And then this creepy monster, the COVID virus is arguably a monster, comes to get us.
It really brought home the very modern type of monster, which is one that is inside us and you can't see and might emerge at any moment. I think people started getting very phobic of other people around them because they thought that they might erupt in COVID at any moment. A bit like zombies. There's a lot of zombie films these days.
Yeah.
And that signals a real kind of shift in where monstrosity sits.
Right. And I'm going to talk to Sarika Davies a little bit more about that. But the thing that emerges in zombie movies and zombie TV shows and emerged in COVID is that eventually the humans start becoming a lot more dangerous than the zombies. And
you saw in the reaction to COVID all the kind of phobia, that there was kind of racial phobia, all of that. So it really spiked all of our guns and got us all anxious in all the different ways because of all the potential sorts of monstrosity that it embodied.
Yeah. Well, the book is terrific. It really is just a great read and fascinating
Thank
to
you.
be. Of course, I actually spent a semester of my college years in a course totally devoted to, I think you just called him Sallust, and we called him Sallust. But I'm that kind of nerd, so I would love this book, obviously. Natalie Lawrence is a historian of science and the author of Enchanted Creatures, Our Monsters and Their Meanings. We're going to talk more about monsters when we come back. Thank you so much, Natalie.
Thank you very much.
Lake monsters of the USA, just looking for a bowling station. If it takes the cloak of darkness, their voices will be counted. You might be asking yourself what happened to this world.
Some gon' get you, some gon' grab you, some gon' jump out the bushes and grab you. Hold on, you're on faster. Some gon' grab you, some gon' jump out the bushes and grab you. Some gon' grab you. Oh, you need to stay and grab it. Yeah, yeah. Keep on running. Keep on running.
I picked this song because Stevie Wonder begins by saying something's going to jump out of the bushes and grab you. It turns out to be him, or him as a placeholder for the lover, which is interesting and kind of fits pretty well into both of the books that we're talking about here today. Very excited to have joined us Sarika Davies, a historian of science, speaker, and monster consultant for radio, TV, and film. She writes a newsletter called Strange and Wondrous, Notes from a Science Historian, and is the author of books including multi-award-winning Renaissance Ethnography and the Invention of the Human New Worlds, Maps and Monsters, and most recently, her book, Humans, A Monstrous History. Sarika Davies, welcome to our conversation.
Thanks so much for having me on.
So I barely know where to start. There's so many different places, but, maybe we could sort of, since we sort of started in the era of Beowulf, one of the things that begins to happen, obviously, is an attempt to understand the rest of the world. What else is out there right now? And that's where you begin to get these maps, right? These maps that say, okay, we're here. Look at all this other stuff that's probably maybe somewhere else. Say a little bit more. I know you love these maps.
I do indeed. And I think the kind of maps of the late 15th and 16th centuries are places where we can see the idea of what human means in the European imagination changing. So just a quick kind of backstory. The idea of kind of human that the age of exploration inherited came from the ancient Greeks and Romans, for whom bodies were kind of squishy. We think of our bodies as maybe more kind of fixed and straightforward and different from, animals and other peoples. But as far as the ancient Greeks and Romans were concerned, if you moved to different climates and ate different kinds of foods, your bodies would change. And in places where the climate was really harsh, say somewhere very hot or very cold, they expected there to be monstrous peoples. And so in the kind of maps of the 16th century, as some of those kind of ancient geographers, works that have been kind of lost for a while, come back in, like the geography of Ptolemy, you start seeing more and more maps with monstrous peoples at the edges of the world. People with kind of giant feet held up above their heads as giant sunshades, human flesh-eating beings, of which there were some also on medieval maps. But once you are actually circumnavigating the Earth and mapping it on a grid, that does beg the question, where is the boundary between human space and monster space? And if you go somewhere where the climate is very harsh, what's that going to mean for the colonial project? And so that idea of the squishy body became something of an existential problem for European explorers and settlers.
But another part of that is once you've set up that paradigm, you start looking for monsters. Who else? Who looks like that? Who doesn't look like us? Whose squishy body got turned into something very, very different? And sometimes those people can be found in Europe, and sometimes as more and more people from other places start to be brought into that sphere, they get identified. But the object of all that, or the process of all that, is turning people into so-called curiosities. We should maybe give some examples of this. You might want to begin by Antoinette Gonsalves, who was not brought in from anywhere. My understanding is she was from France. But tell that story.
Yes, indeed. So this kind of little girl called Antoinette Gonsalves, born in France to a man who had been kidnapped as a child from the Canary Islands, and was covered in hair, most of his body and lots of parts of his face, and he was. Became a courtier, was taught European languages and Latin, and most of his children, with an ordinary French woman, no extra hair, were actually hairy. And little Antoinette and some of her, siblings ended up being sent, around to different aristocratic homes, kind of like trophies. And there are, drawings and paintings surviving of her in lovely dresses with her mostly hairy face. But her life was really shaped by the fact that she had more hair than the average person. There were medical practitioners who wrote about checking how far down the hairiness went and how soft the hair was in different parts of her body. There are portraits of this little hairy girl and her family in a Renaissance curiosity cabinet you can still visit today in the town of Innsbruck in Austria. And there on this wall, along with, you've got crocodiles hanging from above and, rare objects, there are also these portraits of people who were unusually embodied, giants, very small people, a guy who was gored through the eye with a lance, and there's a painting of him with the lance in his eye. So for the kind of a European observer, you had this array of ways in which your body could be different, and these people often found their lives shaped by that. They might perform their bodies for a living or be coerced into doing so, or become someone who is given away as a gift, as of course were enslaved people at times.
Right. So the more that we're at the word. By the way, if you want to see a picture, a depiction of Antoinetta Gonsalves, we're going to have it up. We may even have it up already on the webpage for this episode, ctpublic.org/Colin. But yes, I mean, once you monstrify someone, it's very easy to deprive them of their rights. It's easier to treat them as property. But even, I mean, I was actually, it could be my own ethnicity, but I was touched and troubled by the story of the Irish giant, who was not able to, not only was he not able to control his own destiny in life, he couldn't even really control what happened to his body when he died. Give us just a quick picture of the Irish giant.
So in the 1780s, there was this man called Charles Byrne, who was almost 8 feet tall, and he performed in fairs in London. And like a few very, very tall people, his heart couldn't pump through his whole body for a long time, and he died in his late 20s. But before then, he'd left money and descriptions in his will of what he wanted done to his body after he died. And he, left money for these fishermen to take him out and give him a sea burial. He didn't want to be displayed after his death. But he died, and then along came the surgeon, John Hunter, and he bribed the fishermen, who then reneged on this agreement. And Hunter had Byrne's skeleton, rendered out of his body by boiling it in a kettle, and donated kettle and skeleton to the British Medical Association. And as late as 2016, you could go and see Charles Byrne's skeleton in the Royal College of the Hunterian Museum in London, in the Royal College of Surgeons. And I accidentally walked into this room with this skeleton, and there was a little label saying, this was this guy's life. He didn't want to be displayed after his death. And there I am, looking at his skeleton. And that was not an unusual kind of problem for someone who was seen as strange enough to be kept for science. You can't go and see him there anymore. He's off display, but he hasn't been buried at sea either. His skeleton is there for anyone needing to do legitimate medical research.
So we have to have a second conversation about Caliban, because you heard the first one, I think. But so one of the ways that you monstrify sort of quote unquote foreign peoples is you assign characteristics to them, you assign behaviors to them. I guess I had missed this, but that Caliban is very possibly an anagram for cannibal. And
Indeed.
Part of this idea is one of the reasons you can maybe monstrify a person from some other further reach of the world is by ascribing behavior like cannibalism to that person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Gosh, so much to talk about. Cannibals, Caliban. He's, Caliban's my favorite character in Shakespeare. He, even though he's in some ways kind of villain of this play, he speaks out. He speaks truth to power, and he contains within himself. He's like the everything bagel of the monster, in my view. All of those Renaissance elements of what makes a monster. So his mother was supposedly a witch, and his father was a devil. His shape was all wrong, not human. Then he was probably born under the influence of the moon. Prospero says he was a moon calf. He supposedly couldn't speak properly until Prospero's daughter Miranda taught him so. And Caliban talks about how his island was taken from him by Prospero. So there is this, colonial act of dispossession, which of course was going on all through the 16th century. And most of all, there is this kind of fear in Prospero's mind, as we just heard, that Caliban might theoretically be able to have children with Miranda, which would then pollute that genealogy of humanity. And that is, I think, that gets at the heart of what a monster actually is. Not simply someone who is an other or has been othered, But, monster is a category challenger, a category breaker. Because if Miranda and Caliban are theoretically able to have children, then they're not different, they're not that different in kind. And therein lies the desire to kind of abject Caliban entirely, rather than have a continuum from, Prospero type people through to Caliban as Prospero sees him. And the whole idea of this being a climate that can shape bodies and minds is now messed up with what your genealogy passes down to you, which is, of course, something that becomes embedded in the idea of race, which in the ways in which it changes in the 16th and 17th centuries.
Yes. Well, and this never goes away. This idea that kind of quote-unquote strange places contain monsters, monstrosities, evil. Even at the beginning of the movie The Exorcist, you see the priest Lancaster Merrin. The whole thing takes place in Georgetown in Washington, D.C., except that it begins in Iraq, where this priest finds this stone idol of a demon named Pazuzu. That's where evil is. It is in those places. And it also persists today. You make a great point about Trevor Noah's book, and he actually does kind of a stand-up monologue about this, Born a Crime. Mm-hmm. The idea that because of who he was when he was born in South Africa, he is a crime. But yeah, expand on that if you want.
Yeah, this is really the most kind of extraordinary kind of example of how monster making is the act of telling stories about who counts as, a normal person in the body politic. So mixed race relationships were illegal in South Africa under apartheid. And so Trevor Noah, son of a, black mother and a, white Swiss father, was actually hidden in his home until he was about 8 years old, because he wasn't even kind of supposed to be, exist. And so you have these legal regimes that can, on the one hand, make someone hyper visible because they're not supposed to, exist if you see them out in the world, but also force them into spaces of invisibility. It's like, today legislation being passed saying, trans people or intersex people can't possibly exist. Mm-hmm. Noah's, biography, begins by showing exactly that. What does it mean to call a human being illegal? That kind of language is contagious and built on these kind of ancient reservoirs of prejudice.
So we have to go to the future for a moment. In fact, I want you to come back sometime. We'll just talk about Star Trek, because your Star Trek
that sounds so cool.
But as we look at science fiction, one of the things science fiction does, I think, pretty well a lot of the time is just raise that question. Well, who is the monster? Who's dangerous? Mm-hmm. You mentioned E.T. It eventually becomes clear in both E.T. and the somewhat overlooked Jeff Bridges movie Starman that for these extraterrestrials, we are the danger. We are dangerous to E.T. or to Starman. We want to catch them. We want to examine them. We want to dissect them. And this also applies, as you pointed out in the book, to androids like Data. Data clearly mm-hmm. has some kind of obvious personhood that's almost impossible to overlook just in the way that he strives mm-hmm. for it. So what does somebody want to do? Take him apart, dissect him. So it's kind of interesting as we look towards the future, maybe it's becoming more clear that the human race is not the apex, and maybe in other eyes, the human race is the monster.
Oh, entirely. In the eyes of the kind of actual living animals and beings other than humans on Earth, we're the locusts running around like munching stuff. We also are very sure that we are hermetically sealed from everything else, even though, we have our kind of microbiome of, little kind of germs shaping how we feel, our skin is porous. But we are kind of destroying these other things and in a way kind of amputating ourselves.
Yes, and in Star Trek, the scariest presentation in Star Trek is the Borg Collective. The Borg Collective just fly all over the known universe, assimilated, and they're Columbus, they're the conquistadors. I mean, I just assume at some point, when the Borg have assimilated everybody, they start having Thanksgiving, a little holiday where they celebrate this whole thing. Yeah, go ahead.
They're also, to me, today very like, the kind of AI tech bros, assimilating and making things worse. And funnily enough, just this morning, I did a 2-hour podcast recording about this book and Star Trek. And because it is the 30th anniversary of that iconic Borg double episode, and really then in a way, even now, the idea of humans being partly machine and giving up their individuality and self-determination feels almost possible and therefore real.
Yeah, and when you see, okay, I'm going to just geek out with you for 60 seconds. When Picard becomes transformed into Locutus, he's transhuman. He's got all this creepy, he's got like this mechanical eye thing, stuff like that. It's
even
clear,
he goes gray.
Yeah. And so I don't know, there's something we're reacting to there too. Like this is the next kind of monster, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
All right, we're gonna have to stop. I was getting overexcited. I apologize. This book is great. It's so terrific, and it really does. You do knit antiquity and the future and everything in between together really beautifully. So, first of all, Sarika Davies, thank you so much for your time today. Absolutely feel free to come back and talk about Star Trek. The book is Humans.
Anytime.
Humans: A Monstrous History. We're going to talk about making monsters up for children after this.
After the sky, there are giants in the sky. There are big, tall, terrible, awesome, scary, wonderful giants in the sky.
Okay, got to go fast here, but thanks to our technical producer, the maestro, Dylan Reyes. Coco Cooley, our intern, one of our 2 fabulous interns, is the producer of this show, under the watchful eye of the Lily Tyson Quality Entertainment Borg Collective. But congratulations to Coco. It's a great show. But yeah, we're going to have to talk about making up monsters for children. We couldn't find a better person than Margaret Kyler, the author of 62 children's books, including Monster Mess, Bonaparte Falls Apart, Skeleton Hiccups, and the forthcoming Stompy the Zombie. So first of all, welcome to our conversation. I said Marjorie, I meant said Margaret, I meant Marjorie. Sorry about that. Marjorie. Hi, welcome to our conversation.
Hello.
So monsters and scary things are not purely hypothetical or imaginary to you. You grew up alongside a ghost. Just quickly tell us about that.
Well, I grew up in Princeton, New Jersey, in a haunted house. Allegedly, it was haunted by a Hessian ghost who had died during the Battle of Princeton and the Revolutionary War. And so it was interesting because you'd think as a child, I'd be very frightened by this ghost. He was supposed to appear every year on Christmas Eve and go up the chimney. And I was in the bedroom above the chimney. The chimney went right through my room. But I was not scared of the ghost because he was a friendly ghost and my parents weren't scared of him. I was one of 9, 4 of whom were cousins. So the house was filled with children, and we spent a lot of time talking about and writing about otherworldly creatures.
We sometimes talk, Marjorie, about children as though they're all kind of all the same. They're all kind of wired the same way. Nothing could be further from the truth. I, as a child, I think I could have read your books had they been available to me at the time, but I didn't want to be scared. I didn't want to encounter anything resembling a quote-unquote real monster. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, about the just threshold level of children for monstrousness.
Well, there's a lot of controversy around monsters because there was this book called Uses of Enchantment.
Bruno Bettelheim.
Right, and he really explores monsters in fairy tales or creatures that represent wickedness. And he feels it's important, and he articulated this in his book, that children be exposed to that in fairy tales and not be protected. And it's a way for them to get in touch with their shadow side. There's a lot of Freudian psychology in the book.
Yeah, and he also says, look, do you think children haven't mentally rehearsed the idea, what if my mother were to die? What if my father married somebody who didn't like me? You think children are incapable of thinking about that without the help of fairy tales? But I'm not sure that I entirely buy that.
Well, I don't buy that. I don't write about monsters that are scary. I don't want children to be scared. I think other writers have done that. Certainly Where the Wild Things Are, which is a classic by Maury Sendak, deals with that. That's fine, but I'm different. I like monsters to be friendly, and I don't want children to be scared. I want them to see themselves in the monster that I've created. Often I write about skeletons. I've written about ghosts. I've written about, my newest book is about a zombie. But these creatures face the same challenges that children do, and they have to resolve them. So there's usually a problem that's introduced that they have to figure out how to resolve. And sometimes they depend on others to help them through it.
Actually, as an example, just quickly explain the premise of Bonaparte Falls Apart. This is a good example of what you're talking about. Yeah.
Bonaparte is a skeleton whose bones are always falling off. That's why his name is Bonaparte. And it's time for him to go to school for the first time. And he's very nervous because he thinks the children he'll meet will make fun of him because his bones are always coming loose. Makes it very difficult for him to play baseball and to kind of interact because of the distraction of these bones falling apart. So he's nervous about the first day of school, as are many children when they have to leave the safety of their home and go into a new environment where they're not as protected by their families.
Yeah, and Stompy the zombie, not to spoil too much about it, but he winds up in the hospital, which is, maybe say a little bit about that. This is something maybe a kid can also think about, identify about.
Well, it's interesting about zombies because they live forever. Yeah. And a lot of younger kids, say ages 3 to 5, don't know what a zombie is. Older kids do because there's so much written about zombies, movies, etc., for older kids. But 3 to 5-year-olds, 3 to 7-year-olds don't necessarily know what a zombie is. So I decided to write about a zombie who hasn't been to a family reunion for 500 years because zombies are eternal. They live forever. And he gets organized. There are a lot of puns. He goes to a gross, GROSS, grocery store. He buys finger food, brain eating, all these things that are kind of associated with zombies, but he breaks a leg. And so he worries he has to cancel the reunion, and he's carried off by a witch to urgent scare, and he has to have surgery, and he's very upset because he won't be able to play red fright, green fright, and some of the other games that he was hoping to play at the reunion. So anyway, long story short, how is that problem going to get solved? In fact, he does not solve it. All the relatives who have come from all over the world and walked from miles, because zombies walk slowly for long spaces of time, they come to the hospital, and it turns out there's this huge celebration, huge reunion that takes place in the hospital. So, and his surgery's a success, and they decide to have the next reunion in Death Valley, which is where one of his relatives lives. So there are a lot of puns in the book all the way through. I want it to be really funny. I want kids to laugh. I think kids are very isolated in our culture. Often they're very isolated. I want them to have fun. I want them to laugh. I want them to embrace monsters as friends. I don't want them to be scared.
I would have loved these books, I think, when I was a kid. And by the way, if you're looking for one of these books, either online or in a children's bookstore, it's Marjorie Cuyler, Cuyler. You've got 30 seconds for this, and I apologize. But do you ever have to have a conversation with an illustrator saying, that zombies or that skeleton's a little too scary?
No, the secret to writing a picture book is to write visually so that an illustrator will be really excited and stimulated to bring their own vision to the story. And the publisher picks the illustrator, not the author.
Right. All right. Well, this is fascinating stuff. You've been a wonderful guest, Marjorie Kyler, author of 62 children's books, including Monster Mess, Bonaparte Falls Apart, Skeleton Hiccups, and the forthcoming Stompy the Zombie. We have to say goodbye, but watch out for monsters unless they're nice ones like Marjorie's.